Hello, Harvey. How's it going for you today?
Very good. Having a good day and enjoying being here to meet you. That's a lot. I think I'm looking forward to the conversation. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've talked in the past and we've had some really awesome conversations about how you have worked with a lot of students, and we've had conversations about authenticity and how to connect with them and how to work in the education world, and just connect with people in general. So I'm excited to have some conversations around this field. But to begin, I'm a little bit curious about some things outside of that because our conversations have been there. But to be honest, I don't know a ton about you outside of this world. So can you tell me more about some hobbies you have or some unusual gifts or skills you have that most people may not know about?
Sure. Um, for a for a long time, well, since I was a kid, I've always had dogs, and maybe 40 years ago, we got interested in doing some training and a little breeding and that sort of thing. And we started into the AKC world. So over those 40 years, we've had a number of AKC champions. I've trained for hunt tests, and my wife, who passed away a few years ago, was diabetic, and I trained one of our labs for an alert dog for her so that he would alert anytime she went low because she had a lot of lows. And he would actually go get a juice and bring it to her, when he smelled that she was low. Mostly an odor thing that diabetic puts out when they go low. So I've had a whole variety of training, and I'm kind of ramping down on that. I only have two dogs left, one of my Irish red and white setters, an older boy, and then my lab. And but that has been a really fun uh, side occupation to the education world. And then when I retired, it became more intense because we were going to shows all over the country. Actually, took one of our red and white setters to Westminster in New York. Flew from the West Coast to Westminster, and he was also trained as a service dog, so he flew in cabin. That was interesting. A big old setter flying in cabin. He was. We had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, when we got to Newark, the gentleman in front of me stood up and looked behind me at the seat and said, "Well, I wondered what head that was that came through into my into my wheel well, and it was
Yeah.
his center had stretched out into it." So we had a lot of fun doing it. It was a good gig, and I've got we had a number of litters, and one of the really fun things was placing a dog, a pup, with a family, and watching the reaction of the kids to a new pup, and how they would. Those are just precious memories because they were a lot of fun to watch. So yeah, that's probably my most unusual hobby. So
Oh, that's super cool. Oh man, there's always these clips like my wife Lindsay sent me one of a dog playing volleyball, and we're like, dang, what would it take to teach a dog to do something like that? Maybe it's simple. I'd have no idea, but the things that people can do with animals, I think, is freaking awesome. But helping your wife with who's being diabetic and helping with some of the aspects, is that something that's pretty difficult to help with that quality of life aspect of
it
training, or is
it's
that pretty easy?
it's a stage thing. It's like anything else. It is like
Okay.
teaching kids in a way. You build up, you know, their their abilities in a staged way, and you start with basically. I always started with scent training, so they could identify certain smells, and then I would take cotton swabs, samples of her saliva when she was actually low, and I would train him with those scents
Huh.
to scent when she was going low. And she was what they called a very brittle diabetic, so she could go low very quickly. And he was pretty much with her all the time. I mean, he went everywhere with us. Stores didn't matter; he was there with us, and he would identify that. and his alert technique was a start licking her on the hand or something, and she would know, hey, he's telling me, that I better pay attention, test myself, and it was a very amazing thing to walk through, and I didn't find a lot of information about it ahead of doing it. Now there's a lot of things out there, but when I was doing it, I didn't find it. So I just kind of use logic. What do you need him to do? How do you get to the next step? That sort of thing. So it,
Gotcha.
they're kind of like kids. Yeah, and the only difference is they never forget anything. Kids forget things, but it's like dogs don't
Okay.
forget anything. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, to scaffold it a little bit, but oh, that's fascinating. Oh, cool. I had no idea. I love it. Well, good, man.
It
Okay,
was,
so that's the thing outside of what we've talked about. That's new to me,
yeah.
but I've already alluded to this other side of you, which is this career and education, working with people, working with students. So tell me more about that and let other people know, what is this background? What has your educational journey been like? Your professional journey been like? What's your background?
Well, I'll start by saying what my background was, I'm doing. I say that because I think it's helpful to other people that think maybe I can't do that because of my situation in life. I grew up on a small farm, and I was just and out in the country, pretty isolated. Rode a bus to school, etc. And I think most people thought. And I was a pretty shy kid just because there wasn't many people around and stuff. And I think most people thought, well, you'll just take over the farm and you'll become a farm kid. And I had a couple of teachers in high school, particularly, that really kind of lit my fire. And my first interest was history. They really got me interested in history. And so early on in high school, I decided I want to do something else. I don't want to be a farmer for the rest of my life. I want to do something else. And I think because those teachers were so influential with me, teaching became the natural, kind of outlet because of what they demonstrated to me as caring and development. So I went to college and got a history degree with an education minor, and got my first job a long time ago, 1968. Can you believe that? 1968, and taught history for 3 years at that particular school. And during that time, it was a school that had all the Indian kids from the Indian reservation. And I got very interested in working with them, and they even hired me to go out and do some study hall time on the reservation, aside from my regular job as a teacher. And the counseling aspect of that, working with kids in a counseling mode, became very interesting to me. So I went back in the summers, got my master's degree in educational counseling, and got a job in a more metropolitan school as a counselor slash history teacher for the first couple of years. I was there 8 years, and after the first couple of years, it was full time counseling. I really enjoyed it, and but I'm the type of person that I like challenges. So I was watching what administrators did, some good, some bad, and I thought, you know what? I think that's something that I can do that affects a lot of kids, a school wide issue. So I went back to school again, mostly summer school, and got my certificate to become a principal. And the next year, I got a principal's or vice principal's position in a fairly large high school for Oregon, 900 kids or so. And the vice principal's job was really uh, lit my fire for administration. I enjoyed the working with the teachers. I enjoyed the challenges. and I was responsible for a lot of the discipline. I can't say I enjoyed that, but I did it, and I was fairly creative about it in terms of trying to tailor the discipline so that the child learns some, the student learns something from it rather than it's just go home and sit for 3 days because you did this, that, or the other thing. From there, the principal, the second year I was there, the principal retired mid-year actually, and I took over as principal interim, and then the next year full-time principal. I was principal at the high school there for 4 years, and then again I got the challenge bug and wanted to try my hand at being a superintendent. So I went back to school again, got superintendent's credential and stuff. And during that time, I wanted a little broader experience because I'd always been high school. Plus the fact I wanted to make some time to go back to school because high school principals are on duty like 24/7. So I took the same district, but I took a middle school principalship that opened up. So I got 3 years of middle school experience with middle school kids. That was probably the most fun job I ever had. In some ways, the most challenging, most fun. I had a really great staff. They were very interested in change and getting the best out of the kids. That was a really fun 3 years, and I almost hated to leave it, but then I did move on to a superintendency of a small district. A few years there, and I took superintendency of a larger district. That was a district that was a particular challenge. Most people in the state didn't want to take it because it was kind of a district that had been known for having a lot of trouble. And I knew I had 3 years to go for retirement, and they gave me a 3-year contract, and I said, "I'll take it on." And I I think we did some good things in that district and got it headed in a much more positive direction than it had been. And then I retired in Oregon. My wife had said, "You bought too many toys. You had a boat, you had a camper. You got to go back to work. You can't just retire and take your retirement." And I was only 59. So, but I couldn't work in Oregon because I couldn't collect retirement and work in Oregon. So I came to Washington and took the superintendent principal of the smallest district I could find, which was a K-7 school district with 270 kids. And for the first 3 years, I was superintendent principal there and did everything, including pretty much their business manager job and the whole thing. And at the end of 3 years, I went to the school board and said, I'm kind of burnt out doing so many different tasks, and I think I'm just going to take my retirement. They said, "Oh, no, don't do that. We'll hire a principal." I said, "Okay, hire a principal and come me back to half time." So I stayed another 4 years there as their superintendent half time, and then I did retire and spent the next 10 or so years doing dogs mainly and having some fun. We bought a place that had a ranch and a small ranch, and I could do some bird hunting because I enjoyed bird hunting. I had bird dogs, and I enjoyed bird hunting. And then we moved. My wife was very sick, so we moved back across the mountains to get close to Seattle and medical care because we moved across the mountains. And she passed away in 2019. And then COVID struck, and I looked at what was going on in schools and the trauma that kids and parents and any teachers and everybody was facing because of the COVID. When we came out of COVID, I decided I'm gonna do something to try to help. And so I set up a coaching program. First, it was just a coaching program just for parents students that were having struggles in school, uh, both for the parents and for the kid, to try to help the parents deal better with the child and try to help the child deal better with the school. And I've been doing that, and then I've also gotten a little bit into consulting with school districts around the whole issue of, like you said, on the authenticity and trying to get teachers to recognize that they're working with a whole child. They're not just teaching science or math or whatever the subject matter is. They also need to be looking at everything that child brings to school, um, whatever is happening in their life, their trauma, their good things, whatever, to try to build that kind of self esteem that allows those kids to move on to be productive. So that's been kind of what I've been doing. I made some very interesting connections, you being one of them, uh, and uh, and I've enjoyed that a lot. The professional connections, so that's been a side benefit of jumping back in and doing this. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and that's a basic rundown on where I've been over the last 50 or 60 years.
That is an over. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot. And I feel like we can do a deep dive on any of these aspects for any of these job titles that you've had and probably dive into any number of stories here. But I feel like there were certain points where you said there was a lot of fun in this title, or it was really tough in this title. I don't know where we want to start because at one point you said the middle school was one of the hardest points, was also one of the most, one of the most fun points. And this might be an interesting point because, we had the most fun and it was the most difficult. How did those coincide? And I'm curious about that piece. Are you okay if we start there?
Sure. I'll
Okay,
even
so tell
start
me
with
about
a
that. What was that
story.
experience like? Okay,
I
yeah,
love
tell me about it.
stories, and so I'm between the transition between the high school and the middle school, and
Okay.
and the kids at the middle school hadn't met me yet. They didn't know me. The principal there was leaving, and I was going to come in the next year. Well, we did. It was Hood River, Oregon, and there's a river that runs through Hood River, obviously, and it has great steelhead runs most of the year. And I love steelhead fishing. I am particularly stream fishing. It's just one of my relaxation things to go to the river and go steelhead fishing. So during the summer, in this transition period, I'm down at the river fishing, and this kid who looked about middle school age comes along. He's fishing, and he and I strike up a conversation about the fishing and how the fish had been in the river and blah blah blah. So we're talking away for a while, and pretty soon I said to him, I said, "So where do you go to school?" He said, "Oh, I go to the middle school." And same middle school. I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Well, how you do? You a good student?" He said, I'm not a very good student. I don't like school. I take every opportunity I can not to go, and the principal doesn't like me. I'm in their office all the time, and blah blah blah. So he really opens up to me and starts to talk to me about all these problems with school. So we had that conversation for a little bit, and I got ready to leave the river, and I said to him, "Well, I'll see you next year." What? What? I said, "No, I'm your new principal. I'll see you next
Okay.
year." He said, "Oh, really? Yeah, I'll see you next year." He fishes off down the river for a little bit, and I stayed a little bit longer just because I was curious what was going to happen more than anything. He comes back up the river. He says, "You won't hold what I told you against me, will you?" I said, "Nah, we're going to have a great year." Well, needless to say, he I saw him fairly often, but that wasn't mostly for discipline. He'd come and sit in my office just to talk about fishing or something. And the teachers, a couple of the teachers, said to me, "What do you talk with him about?" I said, "Oh, we talk about fishing and that sort of thing." And she said, "He's so different than he was last year." I said, "Well, you know, uh, he knows that I care and I want him here and I'm interested in him, and that makes all the difference sometimes, doesn't it? You know." So, so that was one of my favorite stories about middle schools. But one of the things I wasn't prepared for is middle school girls.
Okay.
They get in a tiff with each other, and it just goes and goes and goes. And it was like I just couldn't believe that the amount of fighting and backbiting and stuff that they could do. I had this one, two groups of girls that were just constantly doing stuff. And it was just, discipline didn't matter to them. The parents didn't seem to be effective with dealing with it. One day I called both groups in. I sat them down in my office and I looked at them for a while. I said, I'm sick of both of you. I think I'm just going to kick y'all out of school. Oh, Mr. Hazen, you can't do that to us. I said, well, you don't act like you want to be here. You act like you just want to be here to fight. So why shouldn't I? Well, and they broke down and started. A couple of them started crying because they said our parents are going to be so angry at us. I said, well, look, I'll make you a deal. I won't kick any of you out of school, but I don't want to hear any more about you fighting with each other. If you're going to do it, you better keep it away from me because I don't want to hear about it. I'm sick of it. Well, they really did change their tactics. Now, whether they were doing stuff that I never heard about or not, I don't know. But they really did settle down and do a lot better. And sometimes you just got to use the tools that you have at hand to get kids into the reality that, hey, I need to do something different. And these two groups of girls, about five girls in each group, were really nice kids, but they just had a bone to pick with each other and they couldn't let it go. So the girls were most interesting, maybe, of my, because high school girls don't seem to have that sort of interaction that much. It's kind of shocked me that middle school kids, I think it's because of the stage of life and what they're going through, that sort of thing, but different.
Yeah.
So,
I'm curious about this because in both stories, you played a pretty crucial role in a lot of behavior change. But from my background, and I look at behavior change, certainly a key figure in someone's life can change a lot of behavior. It could be a significant other or parent, certainly. But a lot of the time, especially in an academic setting, having one authority figure, a principal, a teacher, even a friend, sometimes isn't quite enough. Right? A teacher that really cares and is really authentic sometimes isn't enough. In other situations, that teacher is everything. And
right.
I have a hard time identifying why sometimes a teacher that really cares isn't enough when a kid is fighting against like a family system that isn't supportive, or they're fighting against bullies or just learning disabilities. And other times, a teacher that cares, like that is everything that connects them. And so, for you, why is it that sometimes
That
being your authentic self changes
Ryan,
everything
that
for a
is a
kid?
really good question, and I've pondered it myself in a variety of ways, and I'm not sure I have a great answer for it. I think it depends a lot on uh, the trust factor that you can build with a child. And some children are so damaged coming from the background they come from at home that it's very difficult to build that trust factor. Um, and sometimes a teacher can't push it over the line, so to speak. In those cases, I think often a counselor can make a difference because a counselor can spend a little more concentrated one on one time than a teacher can in their day. So I encourage teachers, number one, do exactly what you said. Be that person, be that caring person, be the person that wants to help the kids, and the kids lets kids know it. But I also encourage them to recognize when that's not working for a particular student, and to refer that student out to a counselor to get counseling help. And you know, many times a kid will open up to a counselor that doesn't have any authority over them in terms of the classroom, where they won't open up to the teacher because the teacher has some authority over them in the classroom.
Interesting.
Which leads me to another story. I got stories. When I was a
Okay,
counselor,
let's hear it.
when I when I was a counselor, I had a boy that the teachers had referred to me that they said he needs help. We don't know what's going on with him, but he's just kind of a constant disruption. He doesn't seem to care. I think he was a sophomore at that period of time, and something's going on. We don't know what. So I started interacting with him and talking to him, and at first it was real troubled interaction. You know, I had to initiate it. You know, and then pretty soon he started coming in on his own. And one day he came in and he sat down in the office. And he said, "Mr. Hazen, I don't know what to do." I said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, my dad has been abusing all of us kids for years sexually." He said, "But most all of us, I was the youngest, and I've gotten old enough that I can fend him off, so to speak. You know, he broke that chain." He said, "But now my sister, my oldest sister's moved back into the home, and he's started the same pattern of abuse with, and his words weren't this sophisticated, but he was telling me same pattern of abuse that he demonstrated with us, with a grandchild." And he said, "I just can't take it anymore. Something's got to be done." I said, "Okay, well, I'm a mandatory reporter." And I said, "I've got to call the police and get the police involved in this, and CPS, the Children's Protective Service." And he said, "That's okay, whatever you have to do." And and I did. And it was it was probably in the early 1970s. And it was one of the earliest cases in Oregon where somebody was actually fully tried, and he'd spent a good period of time in prison over the whole thing. That was a case where no teacher could make that connection with him that was solid enough to get him to the point where he felt he could come and say, but a counselor could, because a counselor had no power or threat over him. The counselor was just there to talk with him and deal with him. And so I think a partial answer to your question is when the teacher recognizes that there's something going on with the kid, and that it's beyond their ability because of the amount of time they have and the skills they have to deal with it, that they need to refer that out. And I always worked with my staff in order to get them to understand that, you know, that there are breaking points where you can't make that difference. You have to send that out to somebody else. So I guess that's a kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but you know, I think I think it's kind of like a team approach. I think as a school, you have to have a team approach, and part of that team is the recognition that teachers have, uh, that there's something that needs to go out, and on the counselor side, the recognition that a counselor might have that there's something going on here that's even bigger than me, and refer that out to their administrator. So I think it's a real team approach that has to happen in schools in order to help kids as best we can.
I do some pro bono work, and I will go to schools and I will do workshops on preventing or recovering from teacher burnout. And I see these themes a lot where teachers are trying to get past that distrust barrier and get to that point by themselves, or trying to fix a ton of these problems nutritionally, with managing medication, building social relationships, or working through trauma with kids.
Right.
They're taking on all these responsibilities, whether it's reinforced by the culture of the school or the community, or whether it's self imposed, doesn't really matter. They feel like they need to do
Right.
this or they want to do it. And it can be really tough. But when they start to coordinate help, and when we start to implement some of these practices, like working with counselors or therapists or working with their administrators, holy cow, these students start to do really well. You mentioned that a student working one on one with a counselor is really helpful. They have that time to build rapport. It
Right.
seems like that middle schooler that you worked with had a similar effect. You were in the position of a principal, but you had that one on one time, and that allowed you to build rapport in a position that a teacher wouldn't really get to really wouldn't have the time to have to build that rapport. And so we see some of the similar effects, but this is not only helpful for the kid, but boy, I see this being really helpful for managing some of this burnout for the faculty.
I
I see
think
this being very
that's
helpful for the mental health.
I think that's really, really true. And I think, the whole system has been under a lot of stress. And I talk to a lot of administrators, and I think the administrators are under the same amount of stress, maybe more even in some cases, than teachers are. And I think there's a lot of administrative burnout at the same time. But administrators, I think, need to recognize how do I put this, that they aren't managers. They're they're leaders. And from the administrative point of view, they need to be there to not just evaluate and run programs. They're there to support their teachers in every possible way. They're there to help teachers that are showing burnout to find ways to find releases, to find positive things. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that middle school is the principal that preceded me had been a great team builder. I mean, she was really good. And I inherited a team. There's no doubt about it. I didn't build the team from the ground up, I inherited a team. And that was a group of teachers that were really, really interested in kids and in the outcomes that they could create for kids in a fairly tough environment in a way, because we had Hispanic kids who were recent arrivals and spoke mainly Spanish and were in ESL classes. We had kids from a farm area that were pretty much rich kids from farmers that were well off. We had white kids that were not coming from well off families. We had a very integrated group of, of kids. And the student that I mentioned to you was a very interesting example of that issue, because he was basically living with his dad in the woods in a little cabin. His dad was a Vietnam vet. He had experienced tremendous dysfunction because of his time in Vietnam. And the whole staff hated to see him come to school, because if he came to school, there was yelling, screaming, and whatever else going on, because he was venting his own air. And so the kid mirrored a lot of things that the dad had in him, but by finding somebody that cared and could talk his language, which started with fishing, strangely enough, that he could set some of that aside and start moving forward as a student. And the dad came in one time, and he was fully wired about something that had gone on, and he came into my office and he started yelling and screaming. I listened to him for a while and I said, you know, I really respect your son. Your son has just done a lot here to make a whole lot of changes. He looked at me for a minute. He said, nobody ever said anything like that to me before. I said, look, you know, you got a good kid. He just needs support. He needs help. He needs backing, and he'll be okay. He thought about it for a minute. He said, all right, I kind of like you. You're okay. And he left. The secretary said, what did you do? That's the first time he's never left this office screaming and yelling and hollering and angry as all you know. I said, I just treated him like I cared, you know, about his kid. I don't think anybody had actually done that before. They had responded to his anger rather than responding in a way that said, we're here to support your kid and we need your help to do that. And that made all the difference to him. So I think, and I don't even know where we started this question. I kind of lost track in the thing, but I think
It's okay.
administrators need to be that buffer a lot of times between an angry parent and a teacher, or they need to be that buffer between the child and the home sometimes. Uh, I think an administrator that's fully doing their job is a great buffer against um, dysfunction in the system. Uh, so,
Question for you then. Yeah, because the situation is one that many people in perhaps a logical mind, right? We're not reactive, we're not defensive, we're not in fight or flight brain, says, yeah, well, we treat people with respect. We are kind, and kindness comes back to us. Seems to make sense. But when an angry person is right in front of us and we are threatened, a part of our brain does fire and says, you better put your guard up and you better be ready to fight. And it's a natural inclination.
yeah.
And all of us feel that way. So I almost want to wrap up with this question. How do we manage that? And how did you manage that where we can still be authentic and still care, even when our brain and our neurology is fighting to put guards up when people are there challenging us?
Well, that's a good question. And it kind of goes to the heart of one of my. uh, I had a rule that I would tell parents when it got really heated. You don't abuse me, and I won't abuse you. And I remember one distinct time, and this was at the little school, that this very angry parent came in, and I don't know what it was about, but they were angry, and it was another one of these situations where the parent had come to school before and he had everybody scared. And I was leaving to go to a meeting, and I had to be at the meeting at a certain time. And I spent a few minutes with him and said, we're going to need to continue this conversation. And in the meantime, I'd like you to calm down, and I'm here to help. And we can continue this conversation in a reasonable manner. Can you come back tomorrow or whatever it was? I said, but I've got to go to a meeting. So I got up and I walked out of the office and headed towards the parking lot. Well, he followed me into the parking lot and he was screaming and yelling at me in the parking lot. And I finally had enough. I think everybody reaches that point. I've had enough. And I just wheeled around, looked him in the eye, and I said, look, I'm not going to take any more of this from you. I said, you can either come back and talk to me calmly and logically and we'll solve the problem, or you can just shut up and go home and leave me alone because I'm not dealing with you when you're in this state. He looked at me for a minute like he was just totally shocked. And he said, well, I guess I'll come back. And he did. And we had a reasonable conversation. Sometimes I think you just need to put it out there to people that I'm not going to take it from you. You know, you can't sit and take abuse with no response because people will continue to abuse you. So you have to decide what the response is going to be that will make a difference. Uh, and it and it worked in that case. Not saying it would have worked in all cases. Somebody might have taken a swing at me, I suppose, but it was kind of a measured response that I thought might get him headed in a positive direction, and it worked. So one of the things I think administrators need to be able to do, and it's not an easy task, but I think you need to be able to read people, and I think you need to be able to read their emotions, and you need to be able to think about what will work. And I think it's the same with teachers and kids. Not every kid's the same. Not every technique will work with every kid. And a teacher has to make a judgment about what can I do with this child that can move the situation, whatever it is, forward, because it may not be the same as with Johnny over here. We're in a people business, and part of the people business is being able to read people and understand people. And I think too often we get trapped in the motive. Well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, this is the way we've always done it isn't necessarily going to always work, you know. And so you need to think about the individual and what you're dealing with.
So having this go-to response of perhaps give them space, give them time, and be patient, or whatever maybe having a go-to for everybody in every context is not how we handle people, because that takes away this element of being present, being aware of the context, and being aware of the individual. But if we are there with them along the ride, so to speak,
Yep.
then we can be present and we are aware of the individual and we are catering the way that we work with them to them. And I think this can put up some level of boundaries that can insulate us as well. And it can probably help protect the teachers that we work with and educators we work with, the administrators we work with, can insulate them from some of this abuse too, which can be
Yep.
helpful. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I love this, Harvey, because honestly, there are a lot of situations where even as counselors, we have these go-to responses where we say, man, I'm an expert in CBT and I will use CBT with all my clients, but really it takes us away from the present moment, from the present needs of the individual, and we're not there along for the ride with the client or for this person. And what you're describing is we need to be there taking into account the context, the individual, what's going on in the present moment. And if we can do that, not only are we able to help them in the moment, but we can insulate ourselves, our educators, our administrators, really anyone that's in the people business, insulate them from abuse and burnout. And we conserve a lot of resources, but we really do a good job of helping other people out too. So, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like real expertise comes into play when we can be more flexible in how we help people. So, I love it. Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've enjoyed the
For
conversation.
today, yeah, it was fun. I love talking
Yeah.
to you. But that's the time we have for today. So we'll call it good, wrap it up, and we'll call it a night. Thank you for your help, Harvey. It was good chatting with you.